Hello, this is Max Zimmerman, and I'm doing my voice recording for my author discussion. So it's about Malcolm X. Malcolm X, or originally known as Malcolm Little, was born May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the fourth of 18 children to his mother, Louise Norton Little, and his father, Earl Little. His father was a Baptist minister and supporter of Marcus Garvey, who was a black nationalist leader. And his family received death threats from Black Legion, a white supremacist group. And I can see right away where Malcolm got his motivation from, which was his father. Their family moved twice before Malcolm was even 4 because of death threats. In 1929, they had their house burnt down in Lansing, Michigan. And just 2 years later, his father, Earl, was found dead on streetcar tracks, trolley tracks. And the police actually said that both of these cases were accidents. Shortly after Earl's death, Louise had a mental breakdown, and she was committed to a mental institution. So, finding the X. Malcolm dropped out of high school when he was 15 because his teacher asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said he wanted to be a lawyer. And his teacher told him to think of something more realistic, like a carpenter, and said that school basically wasn't necessary for him. When Malcolm was growing up, him and his longtime friend Malcolm Shorty Jarvis moved to Boston, and there they both got arrested for burglary. They were sentenced for 10 years in prison. While Malcolm was in prison, his brother Reginald visited him often, and he actually told Malcolm of this religious organization called Nation of Islam. The organization was led by Elijah Muhammad, and in prison, Malcolm started reading a bunch of books to catch up on his education, and he really found an interest in the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam fought for a state of their own without white people. So basically, they hated white people. They weren't for integration, they were for themselves. In 1952, Malcolm was released after 7 years, and he had parole. And this is when he changed his last name from Little to X. This was because he believed that Little was a slave name, and X signified his lost tribal name. So joining the Nation of Islam. After Malcolm was out of prison, he kept up with the Nation of Islam and all his readings that he had done in prison. And he actually became very close with the leader, and he was minister of 2 of their temples, and he helped found others in various cities. Malcolm urged blacks to cast off the shackles of racism by any means necessary, including violence. So he believed that there was no such thing as a peaceful revolution, and that if you wanted something to happen, you had to do it yourself, and you had to make your own case for it. Malcolm preached this to everyone. He became very popular through newspaper columns, the radio, and TV. He actually surpassed Muhammad. He was that popular. But Martin Luther King Jr. did not approve of his views because Martin was against violence and he wanted integration still. When Malcolm first joined the Nation of Islam, there were only 400 members in 1952. And after just 8 years, in 1960, there were 40,000. So he had a huge impact after he joined. So new findings. Later on, Malcolm found out that Muhammad had not been following his own teachings. He actually had children with multiple women, and this really upset Malcolm because he lived his whole life based off of the teachings, and he was preaching this to thousands of people. After this, he traveled to Mecca and spoke of his beliefs to various people, and he really found himself there and found his own type of Islam, I guess you could say. After returning, Malcolm said that he had met blonde-haired, blue-eyed men I could call my brothers. This was a direct quote from him. And it shows that his trip to Mecca helped him believe in integration, and he began preaching to all races instead of just black people, because he believed that racism had corroded the U.S. Shortly after returning, Malcolm was unfortunately assassinated at a speaking, February 21st, 1965. The 3 gunmen shot him 15 times, so he was dead on the spot. This was extremely unfortunate because Malcolm had just started having new beliefs, and he was preaching integration to everyone instead of just preaching like for black people to be their own person. And themes. So some interesting themes I found: definitely travel and transformation. This has to do with his journey to Mecca. You could call it a pilgrimage almost to Mecca, because when he returned, he had a whole new outlook on what he was preaching and believed more in integration and everyone being equal. That leads me to the next theme, the right of humanity and equality. So he believed everyone had a basic right to humanity, a moral right, and that everyone should be treated equal. This was obviously after his trip to Mecca. And another theme I found was education. That's because when he was 15, he dropped out of high school and was no longer going to school. But he later found education through reading books in prison. And he was a very successful man. He only lived to be 39, and he still had thousands of followers, and everyone started following his beliefs. And obviously prejudice with the racism and everything that was going on in that time era, all the death threats that him and his family received. And that is my presentation on Malcolm X. Have a good day. Oh, and here are my sources. Have a good day.